They believed the body was a tuning fork, that the soul was not something you earned, it was something you remembered, and that the you walking through daily life was mostly asleep. What if your current emotional state wasn't you at all? What if your anxiety, your tiredness, your constant need to heal was just a result of being stuck in the wrong vibration for too long? In the ancient world, mystics didn't think of energy as metaphor. They believed it was geometry, sound, breath, frequency. Not a feeling, but a pattern. A measurable, shiftable, permanent state of consciousness. And they weren't just guessing. In Egypt, initiates would spend 40 days in silent darkness underground, not to suffer, but to recalibrate. In India, sages described 7 energy centers that could be uncoiled through precise breath, posture, and sound. In the mountains of Tibet, monks developed throat chants that altered their brain waves and their body temperature. In early Christian mysticism, the vibration of the soul was described as a hidden harmony waiting to be reawakened through silence, fasting, and sacred words whispered under the breath. All different cultures. Same strange idea, that the human being was tuned wrong and could be tuned back. Not with affirmations, not with wishful thinking, but with a set of practices so powerful, they were guarded in temples and initiatory schools for centuries. Because once a person's vibration changed, they didn't return to who they were. They couldn't. Something permanent happened. Something irreversible. And the mystics, it seems, were after exactly that. But let's pause. Raising your vibration has become the spiritual version of a protein shake. Everyone wants it. Few know what it actually is. In modern language, we associate it with being positive, being grateful, or being high vibe. But if that were true, every smiling person on social media would be vibrating like a Himalayan monk. And they're not. Because in ancient teachings, vibration wasn't about your mood. It was about your resonance. What your entire being was in tune with, mentally, emotionally, physically, and even spiritually. The Sufis said the body was like a flute, hollowed out by pain, but made for divine breath. The Taoists believed true vibrational power came not from doing more, but from becoming empty enough to receive. The Gnostics warned that we are born into a false frequency, a kind of psychic fog, and that only inner genosis could dissolve the static and bring us back into alignment with the divine signal. You won't find this on a trending hashtag, because this wasn't about a quick fix. It was about the soul, its memory, its silence, its strange longing to go home, even while the body remains. Across cultures, the mystics all seem to know something we've forgotten. That spiritual awakening isn't an emotion. It's an adjustment, a literal rise in the octave of your being. They spoke of subtle layers of the self, the animal layer, the emotional current, the mental maze, and something beyond it all. A tuning of light, breath, stillness, into a kind of divine harmony. And those who touched it, even once, never saw the world the same again. But this technique, this forgotten path of raising vibration permanently, it wasn't loud. It was hidden in gestures, encoded in temple murals, sung in chants too ancient to translate. Because it was never meant to be taught with words. It was transmitted. And now, in the age of noise, it's become almost impossible to hear. This is the story of what the ancient mystics believed. About you, your body, your energy, and the strange truth that you're not just feeling off, you're out of tune. The good news? They left a map. A scattered, incomplete, deeply symbolic map, buried in scrolls, sutras, frescoes, rituals, mantras, silence. They didn't promise pleasure. They promised transformation. And it wasn't a one-time buzz. It was a full rewiring of the soul. So tonight, we follow their trail, not to manifest faster, not to chase some high Rubiku, but to remember the real work, the quiet, ancient work of becoming resonant with your highest design. The technique they used wasn't trending, but it worked. It worked. And for those who were brave enough to follow it, there was no going back. They didn't use the word vibration. That came later, somewhere between Tesla and a self-help retreat in Sedona. But the ancients had another word for it. In Egypt, they called it Ma'at, a cosmic harmony that everything either obeyed or fractured. In India, it was Spanda, the subtle pulsation of the universe that echoed into every cell. The Taoists simply referred to it as te, the virtue that arises when one lives in effortless alignment with the way. Different names. Same principle. Everything alive moves. And everything that moves vibrates. So what happens when your inner vibration is off? To the ancients, this wasn't a poetic dilemma. It was a spiritual emergency. It meant your thoughts would attract distortion. Your body would ache. Your mind would spiral. Your dreams would feel distant. And your connection to the divine would dim, not because God moved, but because you became untuned. This wasn't punishment. It was physics. Take the Vedic traditions. Buried deep in the ancient Upanishads is a phrase that still makes modern scientists lean in. As the sound, so the form. They believed the universe was spoken into form, not in a mythic sense, but literally. The mantra Om wasn't a chant. It was a vibrational formula. It contained the AUM of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. Chanted properly, it didn't just sound different. It changed the practitioner. You weren't just making noise. You were making resonance. And when a human being resonated correctly, not just with their voice but with their breath, spine and spirit, something extraordinary happened. The body recalibrated, the mind clarified, and the soul remembered its original pitch. Meanwhile, in the Egyptian temples of Dendera and Karnak, wall reliefs depict curious scenes: priests holding tuning forks, goddesses pouring sound over human figures, pharaohs seated beneath rows of harmonic glyphs, not just decorative, but tonal. Some Egyptologists scoff. Symbolic, they say. But mystics aren't so sure. In the Temple of Hathor, one room still hums at 110 Hz, a frequency later discovered to calm the nervous system and heighten perception. Coincidence? Or did the ancient builders tune the space for spiritual activation? These weren't random artists. And they were engineers of vibration, designing spaces to awaken something most people forgot they had. Travel west to the early Christian desert mystics. The Philokalia, a lesser-known spiritual anthology, speaks of the Jesus Prayer as a breath-synchronized formula. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. But it wasn't meant to be spoken aloud. It was to be breathed in rhythm with the heart. Over time, the repetition would move from the mouth, to the chest, to the soul, and finally to silence. A silence not of absence, but of full vibrational presence. As the mystic Saint Hesychios wrote, the spirit, when cleansed, becomes a mirror to divine radiance, like still water revealing the sky. Then, high in the Himalayas, the Tibetan Buddhists developed overtone chanting, where a single monk could produce multiple frequencies at once. Science still studies it. The monks never needed to. To them it was obvious. The voice is a doorway. Certain sounds rearrange your nervous system, others open the nadis, energetic channels unknown to Western anatomy, and still others carry ancient memories, encoded not in words but in vibration. One chant, they say, can undo lifetimes of distortion. Across the Atlantic, the Mayans built pyramids that echoed precisely bouncing sound in perfect thirds. The Navajo performed blessing way ceremonies, using tonal songs to restore harmony after loss or trauma. The Yoruba of West Africa spoke of Asay, the power in sound, word and breath that animates reality. Again and again the same theme whispers through time. The human being is not just a body, it is an instrument. And somewhere along the way, we forgot how to play it. Today, we sit marcha and chant, high vibes only, into the void. But the ancients knew better. They weren't after a temporary mood lift, but they wanted permanent resonance. Not enlightenment as a moment, but as a new frequency, from which your entire life begins to hum with a deeper harmony. And to reach it, they followed a method. A strange, hidden, rigorous method. One you couldn't buy. You had to become it. Which is where we go next. There's a strange confidence in ancient ritual. Not the frantic kind, but the kind that assumes something will happen, because it always does. The way a seasoned alchemist heats the glass beaker, not hoping for transformation but expecting it, because the formula works. To the mystics of old, raising your vibration wasn't about mood. It was about alignment, precision, attunement, a process not of faith alone, but of practice, repeated, refined, remembered. In the Vedic schools, the aspirant was not simply taught theory. They were taught timbre, how to hold their breath, where to place their tongue, which syllable resonated with which chakra. A mispronounced mantra wasn't just incorrect, it was spiritually inert. This wasn't superstition. It was acoustic engineering of the soul. The Rig Veda, one of the oldest spiritual texts on earth, describes chandas, the metrical structure of sacred verse, not poetic fluff. Mathematical rhythm. They believed sound was a bridge between the visible and invisible worlds, and every bridge must be built in ratio. So they encoded it, verse by verse, syllable by syllable. Even the pauses had power. In ancient Egypt, initiates into the Temple of Isis underwent multi-stage rituals of sound immersion. Each stage focused on a different aspect of the initiate's energy field. One stage involved chanting vowel tones in dark chambers. Another used sistrums, sacred rattles, to shake the stagnant energy free. And the final stage, silence. But not ordinary silence. A silence after resonance, where the vibration continues inward, echoing inside the bones deeper than thought. They believed this was the moment the soul remembered its divine note. And if that sounds poetic, consider this. Modern researchers now observe that the fascia in the human body, the connective tissue webbing that holds us together, responds to vibration, ultrasound, chanting, breath. The ancient mystics didn't need microscopes. They had bodies, and they paid attention. Meanwhile, in China, the Taoist alchemists developed something called internal sound practice. In a secluded cave or mountain hut, a student would sit in complete stillness and listen. Not with the ears, with the dantian, the energetic center below the navel. At first, there is only quiet. But with time, weeks, months, sometimes years, a subtle tone is heard. A ringing, a humming, a cosmic vibration. This was called hearing the inner bell. It wasn't metaphor. It wasn't metaphor. It was diagnosis. If the bell was loud and harmonious, your energy was aligned. If it was off-pitch, so were you. And if it disappeared completely, you had lost your internal harmony and needed to return to practice. The Sufis had their own version. Whirling was not simply dance. It was sonic rotation. Each spin, each step, each breath built rhythm in the heart, in the limbs, in the spirit. In the Sema ceremony, the dervish wears white robes, symbolizing death to ego, a black cloak, symbolizing worldly burial, and a tall hat, symbolizing the tombstone of the self. As they spin counterclockwise around their own heart, they recite the zina, the name of God, Ha, a deep, vibrating breath word. In time, the body forgets its edges. The voice becomes wind, and the vibration is no longer chanted, it is you. The Sufis called it annihilation, but in vibration terms, it's phase cancellation, when two frequencies meet and dissolve into stillness. The Mayans, too, used harmonic architecture. Temples were built so that a single hand clap at the base of a staircase echoed as the chirp of a sacred bird, the Quetzal. Not symbolism, design. They weren't just building monuments, they were building tuning chambers. Standing in one was like standing inside a musical instrument, designed to tune your soul. And what happens when the body, the voice, and the space all resonate together? You're no longer praying, you're vibrating. Not at random, but in alignment with the fundamental tone of creation. Modern people scoff. They put a crystal bowl on Instagram and hope their lives will change. But the ancients knew better. They knew vibration had laws. And those who obeyed those laws, in thought, breath, posture, sound, would change not just their mood, but their destiny. Because vibration wasn't emotional. It was architectural. It built you. It broke you. And when raised, permanently, it revealed you. Not the self you present to the world, but the one that sings beneath all masks. The one that never forgot its song. There's something haunting about forgotten music. Not the songs we stopped listening to, but the ones we were born humming and somehow stopped hearing. The ancient mystics believed the soul had a tone, a frequency it sang before birth, a kind of vibrational fingerprint, unique, subtle, divine, and that our life's suffering came not from punishment or sin, but from forgetting this tone, from falling out of tune with ourselves. Across continents, this idea appeared again and again, not copied but remembered, like the same dream echoing in different minds. In Tibet, the concept was called Rigpa, the direct knowing of one's primordial awareness. Not an idea, not even an experience, but a frequency, one that, if you stilled your thoughts enough, could be heard like the ringing of a distant bell. In the shamanic cultures of the Amazon, the Icaros, sacred songs sung during ayahuasca ceremonies, are not composed. They are received, downloaded, heard in the plant trance, and sung not to entertain but to heal, to cleanse the vibrational field of the person in ceremony. These songs don't rhyme. They don't follow Western scales, but they are precise. Each Icaro targets a specific wound, physical, emotional, spiritual. It's not about the words. It's the vibration. It's medicine in frequency form. They believe the jungle teaches the song, that the leaves hum it, that the vibration of the earth itself wants you to remember. Over in ancient Greece, Pythagoras, yes, the triangle guy, had a school of vibration, not arithmetic, harmony. He believed the soul could be tuned like an instrument, and that illness, mental, physical, or moral, came from disharmony in your inner chords. He taught that planetary orbits made music, the music of the spheres, a celestial song we've all forgotten how to hear. But his teachings were burned, hidden, laughed at. Modern science dismissed him as eccentric, yet still uses his math in string theory. Some truths are too ancient to die. They just go quiet for a while. Even the early Christian mystics, long before the modern dogmas, spoke of the logos, not just a word, not just scripture, but a primordial vibration, the first frequency that rippled across the void and formed light itself. In the beginning was the word, but not a sentence, a tone, the one that made matter dance. Origen, Clement of Alexandria, and later Meister Eckhart all suggested that silence wasn't absence, but fullness, a backdrop of sacred vibration we've forgotten how to detect. They believed the soul could become attuned to that logos again, but only by stillness, repetition, and surrender. No ego survives true resonance. Only clarity remains. Meanwhile, the Dogon people of Mali preserved a myth that boggles modern historians. Long before telescopes, they described the star Sirius B, its density, orbit, and invisible nature, with stunning accuracy. How? They said the star spoke to their ancestors, but not in language, in vibration. Their sacred ceremonies involving masks, dances, and deep-toned drums weren't mere culture. They were instruments. The Dogon believed that through rhythm and resonance they could realign with cosmic frequencies and remember who they were, what they came from, why the stars still pull on their dreams. What ties all these ancient systems together? From Siberian throat singers to Egyptian temple acoustics, from Sufi zikr to Buddhist overtone chants, isn't doctrine. It's tone, not symbolic, literal. They used their breath, their bones, their spaces to tune themselves like instruments, until they vibrated with the cosmos again, until their soul remembered its pitch. So when we say raise your vibration, we're not talking about smiling more. We're not talking about good vibes and Himalayan salt lamps. We're talking about the lost science of energetic attunement, a precise, intentional, cross-cultural quest to return to your original soul tone, the one that illness can't touch, that trauma can drown, that even death cannot silence. And here's the most beautiful part. They believe that once you reattuned, once your soul remembered its pitch, you never lost it again. That's what they meant by permanently raised vibration. Not a mood, not a phase, but a return. And once returned, you don't fall anymore. You hum, you pulse, you move through life like a tuning fork for others. Your presence becomes a frequency, and the world responds. If we want to understand how ancient mystics raised vibration, we have to go back, not just in years, but in tone, to a time when sound was sacred, when a hum could heal, when the earth wasn't just a rock we lived on, but an instrument we lived inside. The earliest known cultures didn't talk about vibration in metaphor. They built with it, breathed with it, organized their temples, their music, even their burial sites, by vibrational resonance. Long before science gave us hertz and frequency spectrums, they had a deeper knowing. Everything moves, everything sings, everything has a pulse. And that pulse? It could be tuned. Take ancient Sumer, cradle of civilization, 3,000 years before Christ. Their temples weren't just stone structures. They were designed to resonate. Archaeologists now believe that the ziggurats, those massive stepped pyramids, were aligned not just to stars, but to sound. They used incantations and tones during rituals not for theatre, but to shift energy. They believed the human voice, when charged with intention, could open portals, not metaphorical ones, energetic, dimensional. They had a word for this process, zikkaratu, to rise high, not just architecturally, spiritually, vibrationally. Meanwhile, in ancient India, the Vedic sages were writing hymns that scientists now analyze for their sonic patterns. The Rig Veda, one of the oldest known texts, was not written to be read. It was written to be chanted, recited with precision, tone, and breath, not because the gods liked music, but because the syllables were believed to carry vibrational codes. Each mantra had a rhythm, a tone, and a vibration, and each vibration corresponded with something in the body, and something in the cosmos. They believed the universe was created through sound, the sacred syllable Om, not because it sounded nice, but because it was the vibration of all existence. The original frequency. The mantra wasn't just spoken, it was embodied. And when done correctly, it changed your vibration permanently. Not a temporary high. Not a mood boost. A full reset. In ancient Egypt, temples weren't just places of prayer. They were vibrational machines. The Temple of Hathor at Dendera has stone reliefs of what appear to be tuning forks. Its chambers were built to amplify specific frequencies. Some rooms echo, others absorb sound entirely. It wasn't accidental. Initiates were brought into these temples for sound initiation. Priests would chant into the chambers, creating resonances that shifted consciousness. They believed certain tones could activate memory, not from this life, but from before. They had a name for this energy body, the ka, which could be strengthened and tuned, and only those whose vibration reached a certain frequency were permitted into deeper levels of the temple. This wasn't just secrecy. It was vibrational safeguarding. You could only go higher if your inner pitch was refined enough to match the chamber itself. Farther east, the Chinese Taoists were mapping meridians, invisible rivers of energy inside the body, and matching them to breath, sound, and movement. One ancient text, the Tao Yin, describes how low humming in the chest, when aligned with breath and posture, could regulate organs, calm the spirit, and shift emotional patterns. They didn't call it vibration, but they called it qi, which translates loosely as life force, but more accurately means vital resonance. They taught that negative emotion creates stagnant qi, and stagnant qi lowers vibration. The cure wasn't medicine. It was movement, breath, sound, a holistic symphony to raise the body back into flow. And once the flow returned, so did clarity. So did clarity. So did health. So did the memory of being part of something larger. And in the Americas, long before colonization, the Olmec and later Mayan peoples built pyramids with chambers that responded to human voice. Chichen Itza's main temple, for instance, echoes in a precise chirping pattern when you clap. Researchers believe this was intentional, meant to mirror the cry of the sacred Quetzal bird. To the Mayans, birds were messengers between worlds. Their sound was sacred, so they engineered buildings to imitate their frequency, not decoration, not art. A literal bridge between realms, built in sound. These cultures didn't talk to each other. They had no email, no translations. Yet from Peru to Persia, Tibet to Memphis, they all came to the same strange truth. That sound changes matter. That frequency is form. And that when humans deliberately align themselves to sacred tone, something wakes up. Not an idea, not even a belief, but a memory, the memory of being vibration itself. But not everything was written down. Some teachings were whispered, not documented, and some weren't even whispered. just felt, passed not in language but in frequency. This was the realm of the mystery schools. Hidden lineages, private initiations, sacred sound, gesture, silence, all used not to impress, but to transform. To raise vibration wasn't just a goal. It was the precondition for enlightenment, and the bridge between human and divine. And the mystics who guarded these rites understood. Not everyone was ready to rise. In ancient Greece, long before Socrates asked annoying questions in the agora, there were temples dedicated to mystery rites, and the most famous of all was Eleusis. For over 2,000 years, the Eleusinian mysteries were held once a year, attracting seekers from across the Mediterranean. No one was allowed to speak of what happened inside. It was considered both sacred and dangerous to reveal. But fragments of the ritual survive. A long fast, a sacred drink, a descent into darkness, and finally, sound. Many believe initiates were led through chambers engineered to produce a specific vibrational experience. Not just a metaphorical death and rebirth, but a literal energetic retuning, a recalibration of the self to something higher. Plato himself hints that the mysteries taught the soul was immortal. An immortal pipe smoke foreboding him range a warnop of samot. And that vibration was the key to remembering. Across the sea, in the sands of Egypt, another school had similar rules. The House of Life, or Per Ankh, hidden within the Temple of Abydos. It trained high initiates in vocal magic, a form of chanting that wasn't simply devotion, but energetic architecture. They didn't just praise gods. They built bridges with their voices. Some tones were only spoken in the inner sanctum, and only after years of purification, because those frequencies, they believed, altered the ether. Once spoken, they could not be undone. One such vibration was connected to the god Thoth, the divine scribe, but also guardian of the voice. His sacred utterances weren't just prayers. They were tools, keys. The spoken word, aligned with intention, breath, and moral purity, was the spiritual technology of its time. And Thoth's initiates didn't study it casually. They lived it. They became it. Meanwhile, in Persia, Zoroastrian fire temples held chants known as the Gathas. They weren't sung to entertain. They were seen as celestial harmonics, tones that aligned the soul with Asha, the divine order of the universe. According to legend, just hearing these vibrations with a clean heart could purify karma. Reciting them correctly could lift the soul to higher planes after death. But there was a catch. Only those who prepared their inner life through ethics, focus, and intention could hold the correct tone. Because the Gathas weren't just words. They were vibrational codes. And your personal resonance had to match their frequency, or they would simply fall flat. In the Himalayan region, particularly in Tibetan Bon and Buddhist lineages, the mystery schools took an even subtler approach. They taught that every human being carried within them a seed sound, a vibration unique to their soul. The job of the master wasn't to teach the student. It was to help them remember their original tone. Through mantras, breathwork, long silent retreats, and deep meditative trance, students were led through the layers of noise, until only that seed remained. Some called it the seed syllable, others, the inner bell. But the goal was always the same, to tune the self so fully to truth that even the body began to resonate differently. Illness fell away. Anger softened. The vibration of ego dissolved, and the natural sound of the soul returned. Even indigenous shamanic cultures had their own version of vibrational initiation. In Siberian, Mongolian, Andean traditions, drums and chants were used not to perform, but to shift consciousness into other realms. The drumming wasn't random. It was rhythmically precise. It matched theta brainwave frequencies, long before neuroscience had the language for it. Why? Because they believed that when the mind quiets, and the nervous system entrains to sacred rhythm, you enter the realm where vibration is felt directly. No belief required. From there they could speak to spirits, ancestors, animals and plants, not through language, but resonance. They didn't learn with books. They learned with frequency, and those who returned from these altered states often came back with new gifts. Insight, healing, clarity, but most of all, a sense that their vibration had changed forever. The mystery schools didn't all wear the same robes. They didn't chant the same syllables, but they all understood the same principle. You don't raise your vibration by accident. You raise it by initiation. And initiation isn't a weekend course. It's a full life refinement of voice, of breath, of thoughts, of energy, until the tone of your being rises into something that cannot fall again. It's one thing to forget something. It's another to have it systematically erased. The story of vibrational wisdom isn't just about mystical temples and secret chants. It's also about what was taken, because throughout history, those who controlled power, political, religious, colonial, understood something that most people didn't. If you can control what a culture hears, you control what it becomes. Many of the original vibrational practices were silenced not by time, but by conquest. In the early Christian era, as the Roman Empire transitioned from polytheism to imperial Christianity, many of the old mystery schools, including Eleusis, were shut down, declared pagan, their chants silenced, their sacred rites outlawed. Why? Because these rites didn't require priests. They didn't demand obedience to external authority. They taught that you could directly experience the divine. You didn't need dogma. You needed alignment. And that was a threat. In Egypt, the House of Life closed its doors during the Roman occupation. Thoth's sacred scripts were burned or hidden. And eventually the Egyptian language itself, which held specific vibrational pronunciations, was lost. Imagine that. An entire tonal system gone. The key to unlocking certain frequencies erased, syllable by syllable. Today, we read about Thoth. We quote his teachings, but the tone is missing. And without tone, something vital is gone. In the Americas, the story is even more brutal. Spanish and Portuguese colonizers arrived not just with guns, but with Bibles and bells. And they knew, if you wanted to erase a spiritual culture, you had to erase its sound. So they outlawed native drumming, banned traditional chants, and declared the sacred use of song and rhythm devil worship. In one generation, entire musical lineages disappeared. The sacred drum, once used to speak to the ancestors, became silent. But in secret, the songs were whispered. In fields, in forests, in dreams. Some elders carried the rhythms in their bodies, humming them silently until their death, so that the memory would not vanish entirely. In Tibet, the Chinese invasion of the mid-20th century led to a similar suppression. Thousands of monasteries were destroyed. Monks who had trained for decades in vibrational mantra were killed or exiled. Those who survived carried the teachings in their hearts, sometimes fleeing across the mountains with nothing but their voices. One monk, interviewed years later in Dharamshala, said, "They burned my monastery, but they cannot burn the sound I have become." Even in Africa, colonial powers outlawed traditional instruments. The mbiro in Zimbabwe, the talking drums of West Africa, the goma in Congo. Why? Because these instruments weren't entertainment. They were spiritual conduits, used to call upon ancestors, initiate healing, and even protect the community. The colonizers knew, when the vibration of a people is strong, they are hard to control, so they dismantled the frequency, note by note, ritual by ritual, and replaced it with foreign hymns, detuned from the original soul. In the modern Western world, something subtler happened. The scientific revolution, beautiful and brilliant in many ways, also brought a kind of vibrational amnesia. Amnesia. We began to reduce sound to decibels, energy to electricity, spirituality to superstition. The language of resonance was replaced by the language of control. And yet, even now, you feel it. You walk into a room where someone is grieving, and the air is heavy. You hear a chant you don't understand, and your spine shivers. You say someone has bad vibes, and you don't need to explain it. Vibration didn't disappear. It just went underground. But underground doesn't mean dead. In recent decades, something remarkable has happened. Indigenous elders have begun to share what they once held in secret. Monastics have reopened scrolls once hidden during war. Even science, the old skeptic, now measures what the mystics long ago felt. That frequency affects form. That sound can heal tissue. That intention changes water. that the nervous system can be entrained through rhythm. We are rediscovering what was never truly lost, only buried beneath forgetting. And perhaps the most important thing of all, these teachings weren't just for initiates. They were for humanity. For now, because something is rising again. An ancient memory, wrapped in vibration, waiting for the ones who can finally hear it. Not everything was erased. Not every drum silenced. Not every chant lost. Some teachings survived, not because they were loud, but because they were carried in silence, like seeds buried in winter, waiting. And now, slowly, they've begun to sprout again. In the mountains of Andean Peru, Quechua shamans still whisper to the rivers. They hum frequencies to the land before planting seeds. And when someone is sick, they don't begin with medicine. They begin with sound. The Akaros, sacred vibrational chants, are not performed. They are transmitted. Each note, they say, is alive. And each plant has a frequency. When sung correctly, it reveals its healing essence. Western tourists often mistake this for folklore, but those who've stayed long enough, who've sat in the dark with the wind, begin to feel something ancient move through them. Not imagined, remembered. In India, despite colonial disruption and commercialization, the sacred Nada yoga tradition endures. Nada means sound, but not just any sound. It is the primal resonance behind creation itself, the unstruck sound, the seed syllable of existence. Masters of Nada yoga spend lifetimes aligning breath, pitch, vibration, and inner stillness. They don't just sing. They become the channel through which vibration flows. One yogi, now 94, describes his practice as tuning the self to the silence between all things. He has never recorded an album. He never will. Because what he sings is not meant for microphones, but for the soul's unfolding. Across the Himalayan border in Tibet, exiled monks have slowly revived their lineage. The deep overtone chants, thought lost in the Cultural Revolution, have returned. How? Because a few survivors refused to let go. They trained in caves, chanted in whispers, and passed the vibration from master to student. Not as information, but as transmission. Modern science now studies these chants for their neurological effects. But the monks laugh at this. You study the sound, we become the sound. In West Africa, the talking drum has begun to speak again. Once outlawed during colonial rule, now it's being taught to young children. Not just as music, but as memory. Each rhythm holds a story. Each beat, a message. Entire proverbs, genealogies, and histories can be encoded in tempo and tone. It's not simply art. It's ancestral language. And the elders say, the more the youth remember the rhythm, the more they'll remember themselves. Even in indigenous Australia, where Dreamtime stories once risked being extinguished, a quiet revival is underway. Some song lines, ancient maps sung across the land, are being reintroduced to the next generation. They are not lyrics. They are vibrational coordinates. A tribal elder said this in a 2021 interview. If the land forgets the song, the land forgets itself. But if even one person sings it right, the land begins to remember again. There's something powerful in that. Something beyond metaphor. And then, there are the hidden lineages. Teachers who don't post on YouTube, who don't run retreats, who don't publish courses. They exist quietly in Nepal, Mongolia, the Sahel, Siberia, and the deserts of Mexico. They carry sounds that aren't recorded. They chant syllables that can't be translated. They hold frequencies so specific that hearing them out of context could disrupt your nervous system. These are not performers. They are keepers. Keepers of resonance, of memory, of the exact conditions under which a human soul vibrates at its highest field. They have no need to convince the world. Their work is not external. They don't aim to fix society. They aim to keep the vibration alive, so that when the world is ready, it will still be possible to return. But perhaps the most fascinating rediscovery is not happening in temples or tribes. It's happening inside ordinary people. A woman in Poland begins humming tones she's never learned, only to realize they match old Slavic healing chants. A man in South Korea dreams of colors and sounds, then finds the patterns in ancient shamanic diagrams. A teenager in Canada starts vibrating their voice while meditating and feels energy move through the spine. No one taught them. No one told them to do it. It came from within, like soul memory breaking through the static. So what does all this mean? It means that the vibrational techniques weren't lost. They were protected, hidden, not to punish us, but to preserve them until we were humble enough to listen again. And now, we are listening. If you were to walk into an ancient temple, say Abydos in Egypt, or the Temple of Apollo in Delphi, you might notice something strange. It hums, not metaphorically. The architecture of many sacred sites was designed not only for grandeur, but for resonance. Stone archways, underground chambers, all configured to hold sound, not mute it. Why? Because to the ancient builders, the human body was not a machine. It was an instrument. And just as the temple was a place for divine echo, so too was the body. You don't raise your vibration by thinking harder. You raise it by becoming more resonant in flesh, bone, breath, and silence. Let's walk through the sacred anatomy. In ancient India, the system of chakras wasn't some psychedelic color chart. Each chakra was seen as a resonant frequency center, like a tuning peg on a stringed instrument. Too tight, and the note is sharp. Too loose, and it's dull. Yogic techniques, breathwork, pranayama, bandhas, energy locks, mantras, were not aesthetic preferences. They were engineering, mystical bioacoustics. The spine itself was viewed as the central channel, the Sushumna Nadi, through which the awakened energy kundalini would rise, tuning the body's frequencies as it ascended. The Egyptians believed something similar, but with a slightly more literal bent. They called the spine the Jed pillar, a symbol of stability, but also the backbone of Osiris, the god of resurrection. Raising the Dejed was a ceremonial act, an actual rite performed to signify the activation of life force energy. Again, this wasn't metaphor. To raise the Jed was to raise the energy of the body into alignment. From primal survival to divine awareness, from contraction to coherence. The resonance wasn't emotional. It was structural. Chinese internal alchemy takes us even deeper. Taoist sages believed the body was a cauldron of transformation, with three main energy centers known as the Dantian, the lower Dantian below the navel, foundational energy, the middle Dantian chest, emotional, breath-based energy, the upper Dantian forehead, spiritual consciousness. Each one had to be refined like a raw substance, not through belief, but through movement, stillness, breath, and sound. Qigong and Tai Chi, far from being slow exercises for the elderly, were designed to smooth the energetic flow, clear stagnation, and allow the body to vibrate in harmony with the cosmos. Imagine tuning a harp not with fingers but with breath. That was the bodywork of ancient China. Even in the Jewish mystical tradition, rarely associated with somatics, the Hebrew letters themselves were understood to be vibratory blueprints. According to the Sefer Yetzirah, Book of Formation, God created the universe through the 32 paths of wisdom, composed of 10 sephirot and 22 letters. Each letter was more than a sound. It was a shape, a frequency, a spiritual force. And when these letters were recited with intent, they were said to activate the body, not just intellectually but cellularly. To pronounce a holy name was to align one's internal resonance with divine will. Speech, breath, posture, all carefully attuned. Because again, the body was not a container. It was a chamber. And the vibration you held would determine what you could receive. Let's pause. Why does this matter? Because too often, modern spirituality treats vibration like an emotion tracker. If you're happy, your vibration is high. If you're sad, it's low. But this was never how the ancients saw it. To them, your structure, your stillness, your sound, and your posture mattered more than your mood. You could be sobbing and still be resonant. You could be giggling and still be out of alignment. Because vibration wasn't about avoiding discomfort. It was about being so tuned that even your grief sang in harmony. So let's summarize the blueprint. The body is not a burden, it's a tuning instrument. Breath is not just for life, it's for sonic refinement. Posture is not just for health, it's for channel clarity. Stillness is not emptiness, it's the amplifier of subtle frequencies. And sacred sounds are not decorations, they're keys to invisible doors. When the body is in resonance, the mind begins to quiet. When the mind quiets, the spirit begins to rise. And when the spirit rises, the entire field of perception changes. Not because the world changed, but because your frequency could finally receive it. That's what ancient mystics meant by vibrational elevation. Not mood, not mantra abuse, but a slow, precise, sacred retuning of the instrument you've been wearing since birth. Let's begin with a dangerous idea. Not dangerous because it's wrong, but because it's almost right. You've heard it everywhere. Raise your vibration. It's on t-shirts, water bottles, social media bios, and morning mantras. It's been hashtagged, affirmationalized, and chanted into coffee mugs across the globe. And yet, ask someone what it actually means, and you'll often get one of two answers. Either a vague sense of feeling better, or a self-help remix of ancient metaphysics. But to the mystics of old, across cultures, centuries and hemispheres, raising your vibration was neither aesthetic nor optional. It was survival. It was medicine. It was transformation. And in many cases, it was the very purpose of human life. So what did they mean? Let's start at the root. In Sanskrit, the word spanda means a sacred pulse, the vibration of consciousness itself. Everything, according to tantric texts, is this vibration. From breath to thought, to the shape of your fingers, all forms arise from one divine tremor. To raise your vibration didn't mean to be cheerful. It meant to refine your alignment with this primal hum. Not louder, not faster, but finer, closer to the source. In ancient Egypt, it was said that Ptah, the creator god, spoke the world into existence, but not like a man issuing commands. His speech was vibrational geometry. Every word was a frequency. Every sound a sacred pattern. To speak Mahat was to live in cosmic harmony. To not was to fall into his fet, chaos, distortion and soul decay. So when a priest underwent ritual purification, they weren't just cleansing their body. They were fine-tuning the instrument of resonance, because their vibration had to match the divine order to be of any spiritual use. In Taoist thought, particularly from the Zhuangzi and later internal alchemy schools, there's the idea that the body contains a resonant field. They didn't call it that, of course, but they spoke of qi, the flowing energy, and the importance of stillness, sound, breath, and posture to create internal clarity. Raising vibration, in this context, was more about removing turbulence. Imagine a bowl of water. If it's still, it reflects the moon perfectly. If it's stirred, it distorts the sky. To elevate one's vibration meant becoming still enough, open enough, for the Tao to express itself through you. In the Kabbalistic tradition, there's a concept called hitbodedut, a form of ecstatic prayer or meditation in which the practitioner speaks spontaneously to the divine. The goal? Not memorized ritual, not public display, but vibrational intimacy. By allowing the deepest truth of the heart to rise through the voice, without filters, without rehearsal, the seeker is said to rise through the Sephirah, the divine emanations. Each level corresponds to subtler states of being, less ego, more soul. And so the speech itself becomes a ladder of vibration. Each word, if honest enough, carries the soul upward. We're not done yet. Among Sufi mystics, the practice of dhikr, rhythmic repetition of the names of God, is not about mantras as magic spells. It is about rhythmic remembrance. The vibration, the breath, the spinning, the drums, they all converge into one purpose, to pierce through the density of forgetfulness and awaken divine awareness in the cells. One Sufi poet said, "We do not speak the names of God. The names of God speak through us. Once we've emptied ourselves enough to echo." That is not a motivational quote. That is a spiritual equation. So let's gather the pieces. To raise one's vibration is not to add something. It is to strip away distortion. It is not emotional inflation. It is energetic purification. You don't rise by pretending. You rise by remembering, and then removing everything in you that cannot hold that memory. Ancient mystics agreed on this across continents. The body is a vessel. The mind is a tuning fork. The spirit is sound. The goal is to become resonant with the truth of all things, not temporarily, not conditionally, but permanently. And that requires more than sage and Spotify playlists. It requires what we'll now explore in the next sections. The step-by-step process across cultures by which mystics elevated the human frequency. Because once you understand that vibration is not mood but structure, you begin to live very differently. There's a reason every mystical lineage eventually turns inward. After the chants, the rituals, the movements and breath, they arrive at the same doorway, thought, but not the scattered mind chatter of modern life. Not the mental clutter that loops and worries and plays back old humiliations like bad reruns. No, they meant something deeper. They meant the inner word, the secret speech behind your face, the internal incantation that hums all day long, whether you notice it or not. The ancient mystics believed this silent, constant thought stream was not just commentary. It was creation. In the Corpus Hermeticum, Hermes Trismegistus says, "As you think, so you become. Thought is the father of word, and word is the seed of all things." In other words, thought was seen not as a mental process but a vibrational generator. Every thought had weight, tone, direction, and over time it carved the shape of your reality like water through stone. They weren't talking about manifestation as it's marketed now. They meant physics of the soul. Let's go deeper. In Kabbalah, the very first creative act was not an explosion but a speech act. Let there be light. The mystics asked, how could speech exist before a mouth? Their answer, the original word was not external sound. It was the divine thought, made vibration. The Zohar describes the process of creation as mental vibration manifesting into form. Not wishful thinking, not imagination, but a kind of thought frequency alignment where reality shapes itself around what you hold most deeply. In the East, this teaching takes on another form. The Upanishads say, "As is your desire, so is your will. As is your will, so is your deed. As is your deed, so is your destiny." But what precedes desire? Impression. Yogic texts like the Yoga Sutras speak of samskaras, latent impressions stored in the subconscious, formed by repeated thoughts and experiences. These samskaras determine not just your actions, but your energetic field. To purify vibration, you don't just chant louder. You must purify the seed thoughts, the ones too quiet to notice, but powerful enough to bend your entire timeline. Tibetan mystics had their own view. In Dzogchen practice, one of the highest forms of inner teaching, the goal is to observe the instant a thought arises before it forms into identity. Why? Because in that moment, you can see, thought is not yours. It is a wave, and you are the ocean. Let it pass, and your vibration rises. Cling to it, and your vibration knots. Every thought believed is a binding. Every thought observed is a release. This wasn't poetic metaphor. It was energetic hygiene. So what does this mean for us? It means your vibrational field is not just the result of what you do. It is deeply shaped by what you rehearse silently. The way you explain your life to yourself. The names you secretly call yourself when no one's watching. The future you picture behind your eyes, on loop. These are not innocent. They are programming your frequency, one wordless sentence at a time. Florence Scovel Shinn, writing in the early 20th century, echoed this ancient truth when she said, "Your word is your wand. It creates your reality." But even she knew the word was more than just speech. It was the tone of the soul, the underlying emotion, the frequency of belief behind the phrase. Say, "I am wealthy in fear," and you resonate scarcity. Say, "I am unseen," with self-pity, and you deepen isolation. The vibration is not in the words. It is in the charge beneath them. So how do the mystics suggest we shift it? Not by fighting thoughts, not by judging them, but by replacing the inner word with intentional resonance. This is why mantras, affirmations, sacred names and holy phrases appear across cultures. Aham Brahmasmi. I am the Absolute. Aye, Asher. Aye, I am that I am. Namo Amitabha. I bow to infinite light. Allahu Akbar. God is greater. When spoken with heart alignment and silence behind them, these become vibrational retuners. They don't just shift belief. They change the climate inside your being. So let's remember, the thoughts you ignore still hum beneath your decisions. The words you speak in secret shape your field. The stories you rehearse become spiritual architecture. This is not superstition. It is the vibrational logic of mystics, philosophers and sages for millennia. If your vibration is stuck, don't look at your to-do list. Look at your inner speech. What are you saying in the dark without realizing it? Because the soul is always listening. And the universe? It answers to your inner word, not your public one. Every spiritual tradition has its version of this quiet warning. You cannot rise while clinging to who you think you are. They may phrase it differently. Buddha spoke of non-self, anatta, Jesus of dying to self, Rumi of burning the house down, and the Taoists of unlearning everything, but the pattern is consistent. There is no ascension without collapse, no vibrational rising without a shedding, no true transformation while the mask is still glued on. And yet, what is the mask? It is the name we defend, the image we protect, the personality we perform. The mystics called this the false self, a constructed identity stitched together from memories, reactions, titles, roles, and old pain. To the world, it looks like you, but to the soul, it's a costume that weighs you down. In ancient Egyptian teachings, particularly in the Book of the Dead, a soul's worth wasn't weighed by achievements or virtue. It was weighed literally against a feather, the feather of Mayat, symbol of truth. If the heart was heavy with attachments, ego and lies, it sank. If it was light, free of falsehood, it rose. It's a poetic image, but also a principle. Lightness isn't emptiness. It's freedom from distortion. You cannot rise in vibration while still orbiting the gravitational pull of who you're pretending to be. This collapse isn't necessarily dramatic. No fire from heaven, no stage exit. More often, it's an erosion. You begin to notice that your achievements no longer satisfy. The compliments no longer comfort. The performance becomes exhausting. And slowly a quiet voice asks, "Who are you?" If none of this is real, this is the start of what many mystics call the dark night of the soul. Not depression, not failure, but the death of the role. In Christian mysticism, John of the Cross described it with painful clarity. In the dark night, the soul detaches from all that is not God. It walks in darkness, not because it is lost, but because it is being stripped of everything false. This stripping isn't punishment. It's purification. You cannot vibrate higher while weighed down by the scaffolding of ego. The mind built it. The soul will tear it down. And it must. In Sufism, the metaphor is wine. Not the drink, but the essence. But the essence. You are the cup. The ego is the residue. Before you can be filled with divine intoxication, the cup must be cleaned, sometimes shattered. Rumi wrote, "Be like a melting snow. Wash yourself of yourself." It's uncomfortable, but it's not a crisis. It's a sacred dismantling. In Zen, they speak of the emptiness before enlightenment. Not a blank void, but a stillness where the false identifications fall away. The monk who no longer thinks of himself as a good meditator. The teacher who no longer sees himself as wise. The seeker who no longer imagines she's almost there. The moment those concepts dissolve, vibration rises. Why? Because pretending is a heavy frequency. Letting go is light. Florence Scovel Shinn, though often associated with positive affirmations, knew this truth as well. She wrote, "Man can only receive what he sees himself receiving. If he sees himself as a victim, he receives victimhood. If he drops the illusion and sees clearly, he steps into the power of the divine plan." The illusion she speaks of is the ego's favorite story. I am this title. I am this wound. I am this personality. But what if that's not true? What if none of it is real? This is why so many mystical systems place such intense focus on ego death, not to erase individuality, but to liberate the soul from the narrow fiction it mistook for truth. The Gnostics believed that archons, spiritual forces of illusion, kept the soul trapped not with violence but with false identity. The soul had to remember its origin, its divine essence beyond personality. Only then could it ascend. So how do you know the false self is collapsing? The things you used to chase now feel irrelevant. The roles you once performed now feel robotic. The image you crafted begins to feel like a costume you're tired of wearing. And beneath it all, a strange silence grows. It's not apathy, it's clarity. You're not broken. You're breaking free. You are not your social media profile. not your trauma. Not your job, status, or preferences. Those are masks you wore in the play. And the play is ending. Not with fanfare, but with a gentle unraveling. So let it unravel. Because until the false self collapses, the true self cannot rise. And until the true self rises, your vibration stays tied to a script you no longer believe in. This isn't loss. It's the precondition of light. They say silence is golden. But to the ancient mystics, presence was platinum. Not presence as in look at me. Not the kind that's loud or confident or camera ready, but the quiet kind. The kind that listens. The kind that dissolves all narratives. The kind that sits with a tree and becomes the tree. That walks without needing to arrive. To the modern mind, presence sounds passive, unproductive, maybe even boring. But to the ancient soul, presence was alchemical. Let's start with the Taoists. The Tao, by definition, cannot be grasped. It cannot be chased or understood through logic, but it can be entered. And the entry point is presence. Lao Tzu said, stop thinking and end your problems. That doesn't mean ignorance. It means entering the field beneath thought, the state where your inner narration goes quiet, and something else begins to flow, not will, not intellect, but vibration. In this state, the Tao flows through you, not metaphorically, literally. The pulse of life is felt again. The harmony with all things returns. And in this state, your frequency rises, not by effort, but by resonance, because you are no longer in resistance. You are no longer generating friction with what is. You are being. And being, according to the mystics, is the highest frequency there is. Let's cross over to the Christian desert mystics. They went out into the barren lands not to escape the world, but to escape the noise within. They believed that silence wasn't just silence. It was a language of the divine, a stillness that restructured the soul from the inside out. Saint Isaac the Syrian wrote, "Silence is the mystery of the world to come. Speech is the garment of this world." To be present, then, was to begin tuning into something deeper than narrative. To sit in presence was to rejoin the eternal frequency. No begging, no proving, just awareness. And from that awareness, reorganization happens. The inner field begins to align. In India, this was called darshan, the practice of simply being in the presence of the divine. But darshan didn't require words, or rituals, or formulas. It only required still receptivity. To sit in the presence of a teacher, to sit in the presence of a sacred image, or to sit in the presence of oneself, stripped of story, was to be reattuned to the divine current. Here's the real teaching most people miss. Presence doesn't just feel good. It rewires your nervous system. It recalibrates your thought field. It shifts your energetic signature. In neuroscience, this correlates with brainwave states, theta, alpha, the deep, coherent frequencies of rest and integration. But the mystics didn't have EEGs. They had discernment. And they could feel down to the bones that when they entered true presence, they became a different being. More open, more empty, more vibrant. Presence also collapses time, and time is one of the great weights on human vibration. When you're lost in past guilt or future fear, your energy splinters. Your power is diluted. But when you return to presence, you re-enter eternity. You re-enter the now. And the now, according to every spiritual lineage, is the seat of God. Eckhart Tolle, modern mystic. Yes, but rooted in ancient truth. Put it this way, realize deeply that the present moment is all you ever have. Make the now the primary focus of your life. When the now is primary, identity falls away. Ego softens. Pain loosens. And the soul rises. In Kabbalistic tradition, this idea of presence is encoded in the name of God itself. YHWH, often mistranslated, misunderstood, but etymologically close to the phrase, I am that I am. Not I was, not I will be, I am. The very vibration of divine identity is anchored in presence. When you are present, you are most like God, because you are not divided. You are not hiding. You are simply here. So what does presence do to your vibration? It clears interference. It burns away mental noise. It halts the production of false frequencies, and in that stillness, your original note emerges again. The soul begins to sing, not loudly, but clearly, and that clarity is magnetic. It draws truth. It draws alignment. It draws others who recognize the frequency of someone who has come home, not because they chased light, but because they stopped running from the now. This is why so many mystics, monks, and seekers appear to do nothing. They're not inactive. They're tuning. And what they tune into transforms everything. Presence is not the result of a high vibration. It is the condition that allows it. To be still, to be silent, to be truly here, is not passivity. It is the ultimate act of remembrance. If you spend enough time around spiritual circles, both ancient and modern, you'll hear the word ascension whispered like a sacred destination. Ascend, and you will rise. Ascend, and you'll leave behind pain, doubt, heaviness. But the mystics didn't talk about ascension as a sky escape. They weren't trying to fly away. They were trying to remember the highest version of themselves, and stay there. Not visit during a retreat. Not touch it during a fast. But live there, walk there, speak from there. What they meant by permanent ascension was not a vacation to the divine, but a permanent relocation of the soul's center. Let's be clear, this wasn't about bypassing life. In fact, most mystics had plenty of earthly responsibilities. Many were farmers, craftsmen, midwives, teachers. They didn't abandon the world. They rewired their frequency inside it. The ascension they sought was a shift in base operating system. You could be cooking stew, but doing it from presence. You could be walking to the well, while meditating on divine names. You could grieve, and still remember the eternal self beneath the sorrow. This was not mood management. It was a vibrational shift in identity. In Hermetic teachings like the Corpus Hermeticum, there is a concept called the rebirth of the soul. You have become a god since you have come out of the man, it says. This was not ego inflation. It was ego dissolution. To ascend permanently meant you stopped identifying as the small, reactive self. You began to live from the divine pattern within you. The Greeks called this nous, the divine intellect. The Egyptians encoded it in Thoth, the scribe of the gods, the one who remembered eternal law. To live from that place was not to glow on mountaintops. It was to walk through the market with God still intact inside you. Now, there were stages. The Buddhists spoke of it as the Eightfold Path, leading ultimately to nirvana, a state not of pleasure but of release. To them, permanent elevation meant liberation from craving. When you stopped swinging between desire and aversion, you were no longer chained to the pendulum of suffering. And in that quiet center, peace, clarity, a radiance untouched by fortune or loss. To stay there, that was ascension, and it wasn't dramatic. It was simple. In the Christian mystical tradition, they spoke of the unitive way. It came after purification, after illumination. The unitive stage was when the soul was so aligned with God, so still in its nature, that it could no longer be separated, not by sin, not by fear, not even by death. Saint Teresa of Avila called it spiritual marriage, not a moment of inspiration, a dwelling place, not a Sunday feeling, but a frequency. This was the secret most seekers missed. Permanent ascension was not a rise, it was a homecoming. But here's where the ancient mystics were deeply honest. It wasn't guaranteed. It wasn't fast. You could taste divine awareness, then lose it the next day. You could have visions, then fall back into envy and gossip. So they created technologies of anchoring, rituals, mantras. Meditative prayers, disciplines that weren't about dogma, but about stability. They knew that vibration could spike, but they were after stabilization. That was ascension. Not touching light, becoming light and staying there in a body. And it came with a paradox. The more you ascend, the less you care about ascending. Because the person who wanted it so badly, that person dissolves. The hunger softens. The seeking burns off. What remains is a quiet joy, a luminous peace, a strange humility that doesn't advertise itself. You don't need to convince anyone you've ascended, because you're not higher. You're just here in a way most people have forgotten how to be. Inside, you are nothing, and therefore, everything flows through you. In the teachings of the Sufis, there's a beautiful phrase, die before you die. It meant letting go of the false self now, so that when the body goes, nothing essential is lost. That was ascension. Not a peak, but a release. Not an achievement, but an allowing. When all masks fell, and only truth remained. When the soul stopped fluctuating like a candle in the wind, and burned like an eternal flame. That was permanence. Not because the external stayed still, but because you did. So yes, ancient mystics believed you could raise your vibration permanently. But they didn't imagine it like a staircase to heaven. They saw it as a remembrance of what you already are. Beneath the noise, beneath the trauma, beneath the timelines and striving and thought loops. They didn't want you to rise above the world. They wanted you to see God in all things and still sweep the floor, to love the unlovable, to breathe through the pain, to live rooted in the unshakable self. That's not temporary light. That's not a peak state. That's what the mystics called eternity. Now, of all the sacred technologies whispered across temples and mountains, none is more universal, more elemental than breath. Not incense, not scripture, breath. It's the first thing you do when you enter this world, and the last thing you'll do when you leave it. But in between, most people forget it's even happening. The mystics didn't. They studied breath the way a jeweler studies light through a diamond. And across continents, India, Egypt, Greece, China, the Andes, they all agreed on one thing. Breath is not just air. It's spirit, vibration, and memory moving through form. Let's start with India. The Vedic sages believed the breath wasn't just a body function. It was prana, life force. In the Upanishads, they describe 5 winds that move through the body. Each wind governs a different function. Digestion, circulation, thought, elimination, expansion. Control the breath, and you control the inner winds. Through pranayama, breath regulation, they trained their nervous systems to soften, still and rise. Not through willpower, but through rhythm. Inhale, retain. Exhale, retain. Time collapses. The body quiets. Soon, the mind follows. This wasn't just relaxation. This was energetic ascension through breath control. Over in Taoist China, the breath was seen as a vehicle for alchemy. In internal Taoist practices, the term qi mirrors the Vedic prana. They believed you could refine qi through deep abdominal breathing, what we now call diaphragmatic breath, but they took it further. By breathing into the dantian, an energetic center below the navel, they could store and transmute life force. Over time, this practice wasn't just about health or energy. It was about immortality. They weren't trying to live forever in the body. They were trying to crystallize consciousness so it could transcend time. Breath was their philosopher's stone. In the Egyptian mystery schools, breath wasn't spoken about as often in texts, but encoded in ritual posture and initiation rites. The ankh, the cross with a loop at the top, wasn't just a symbol of eternal life. Some scholars and mystics suggest it represented the control of breath and sound, aligning the body with cosmic order. The mouth of the gods, the breath of Ra, all pointed to breath as the carrier of divine vibration. You didn't just inhale oxygen, you inhaled memory, order, light. To breathe consciously was to realign with Ma'at, the ancient principle of cosmic balance. The Greeks too had something to say. The word psyche originally meant both soul and breath. They were inseparable. In Stoic thought, yes, even among the philosophers, breath was central to self-mastery. Marcus Aurelius spoke of returning to the breath during storms of thought. Epictetus taught that breath was where emotion could be observed, slowed, and eventually purified. The mystery schools in Eleusis taught initiates to breathe in sacred rhythm before vision quests and symbolic deaths. And in Plato's dialogues, we hear echoes of breathwork as a gateway to the realm of forms, the higher vibrational plane of pure knowledge. Among the shamans of the Andes and Amazon, breath was used to journey. Before plant medicine, before trance, there was breath. They would breathe rapidly to shake loose the boundaries of the mind, or slowly, deeply, to anchor into the dream of the earth. Breath to them was not human. It was the wind of the ancestors moving through the lungs. Each inhale was a visitation. Each exhale, a release. Some even believed that trauma lived in the gaps between breaths. But to breathe fully was to reclaim parts of the soul that had been frozen. Not metaphorically, literally. Even in Christianity, though, often overlooked, breath played a divine role. The Hebrew word ruach means both spirit and breath. In Greek, pneuma means the same. God breathed into Adam's nostrils the breath of life. In the early Christian mystical texts, breath was the way to feel God inside. The Desert Fathers practiced hesychasm, breathing slowly while repeating the Jesus prayer, until the inner world became still. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Inhale, Lord Jesus Christ. Lord, exhale, have mercy. Have mercy. Repeat, 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 until the mind dissolved and only the heart remained. Across all these cultures, the message was simple. If you want to raise your vibration, start with your breath. Not because it's trendy, but because breath is the sacred rope between form and formlessness. It grounds you. It lifts you. It teaches you to stay. And as the ancient mystics believed, you don't have to climb mountains. You don't have to find gurus. Just sit. Just breathe. Just be. Because every inhale is an invitation, and every exhale, a letting go of the self you were never meant to keep. If breath is the bridge, then sound is the frequency of crossing. Sound doesn't just vibrate the air, it vibrates the soul. And the ancient world knew this better than any sound engineer. Before microphones, before Spotify, before headphones and hertz and apps that promise 432 hertz healing, there were syllables carved into stone, chants whispered in caves, mantras passed from breath to breath like firelight in the dark. Across every sacred tradition, one principle repeats. Vibration is not something you listen to. It's something you become. Let's begin in Vedic India. There is one sound said to contain the entire universe in seed form. It's not a word. It's not even a chant. It's a frequency. The Mandukya Upanishad, one of the shortest but most mystical Vedic texts, is devoted entirely to the syllable Aum. Each letter symbolizes a state of consciousness. A waking, Utols, dreaming, Mel, deep sleep, and the silence after, Turiya, the fourth state, the unstruck sound, pure being. Chanting it wasn't a religious act. It was a vibrational realignment with the source of all reality. To repeat a mantra like Namah Shivaya wasn't superstition, it was sonic alchemy. Each syllable, a tuning fork. Each repetition, a chisel on the soul. Now travel westward to ancient Egypt. Though many original chants have been lost, inscriptions from temple walls and reconstructed rituals suggest that vibration played a central role in spiritual elevation. Priests in the temples of Karnak and Luxor believed certain intonations could activate divine resonance in the body. Some hieroglyphs even depict chants sung with specific intonation gestures, as if directing energy through the body's meridians. The very name Amun, the Hidden One, was whispered in elongated tones believed to harmonize the heart with cosmic will. They didn't call it raising your vibration, but their initiatory practices were calibrated through sound. Then there were the Greeks. To them, sound wasn't just healing, it was the geometry of the divine. Pythagoras, often remembered as a math guy, was actually a mystic musician. He believed the entire cosmos vibrated in mathematical harmony, what he called the music of the spheres. Though we can't hear it with our ears, the planets, he taught, sang in perfect ratio. He and his followers used monochords, single-stringed instruments, to demonstrate how vibration affects reality. They believed sound could purify the soul, literally reorder the energetic body. This wasn't art. It was medicine for the invisible. In Tibetan Buddhism, the mantra became a vehicle for awakening. The most well-known? Om Mani Padme Hum. Shahannakwale. Shahannakwale. It means, roughly, hail to the jewel in the lotus. But that's just the surface. Each syllable is said to purify one of the 6 realms of existence. Each syllable vibrates a different chakra. Each repetition smooths the mind, the breath, the karmic residue. Even the way it's intoned matters. Whispered, sung, chanted, in deep resonance. They believed the sound vibrates not just outward, but inward, into the tissues, into the bones, until the illusion of separation melts away. The Hebrews and early Christians also held sacred sound in reverence. The name of God, Yhweh, was considered unpronounceable, not because it was forbidden, but because it was a breath sound. Yod-He Vav-He. Try saying it. You'll notice you're not saying anything. You're breathing. Some mystics believe it was a reminder that God is not a name, but a frequency moving through breath. Even the Psalms, when sung in their original form, were coded musical prayers meant to align the body with divine order. The Desert Fathers, early Christian mystics, chanted in silence, not to fill space, but to match the pulse of the divine heartbeat. Among the Yoruba of West Africa, sound wasn't just ritual, it was summoning. Drumming patterns invoked deities. Chants called ancestors by name. Each sound carried encoded memory. They didn't speak to the divine. They sounded it into the room. And even the pauses between drum beats were sacred. They believed sound was so powerful, you didn't need to know the language. You needed to know the intention. Because intention wrapped in vibration changes the air. All these cultures, and there are more, point to one shared truth. When you repeat a sound with awareness, you are not worshipping something outside of you. You are awakening something within. You are reminding the cells of your body what alignment feels like. You are repatterning thought, emotion, and memory. The chant isn't magic. It's memory. Not of something you learned, but of something you are. And so, the mystics returned again and again to sound, not to impress others, not to perform, but because sound is the echo of the soul, remembering itself. You want to raise your vibration? Start speaking as if your voice holds power, because it does, not in metaphor, but in frequency. And every mantra, every chant, every sacred sound whispered to the wind was really saying the same thing. Wake up. You were never just a body. Before there were yoga studios, before there were fitness apps or ergonomic chairs, before anyone spoke of alignment as a wellness trend, there were sages, shamans, and mystics who saw posture as a sacred key, not to look good, not to impress others, but to unlock energy flow, raise spiritual vibration, and enter altered states of consciousness. They didn't say it in those words, but they lived by it, because to the ancient world, the body was a spiritual instrument, and how you carried it changed what it could perceive. You weren't just standing, you were tuning. You weren't just moving, you were remembering. Let's begin in ancient China, with the slow, spiraling grace of Qigong and Tai Chi. These weren't just martial arts, they were energy arts. Every motion flowed like water, every stance aligned with the earth and sky. The spine wasn't just a bone, it was a conduit for life force, known as Qi. Practitioners stood for hours in silent postures, not for strength, but to awaken internal flow. Stillness bred sensation. Movement directed intention. They believed energy pools in the dantian, the lower belly, and with precise motion and breath, you could circulate it upward, bathing the organs, expanding awareness, and refining spirit. This wasn't metaphor. It was energetic physics, taught long before quantum fields made it trendy. Now, go west to India. Here, posture was elevated to a science of divine engineering, asana. The word itself doesn't mean stretch. It means seat, a steady, comfortable position designed for inner stillness. But hidden inside each pose was something more profound. Certain postures opened energy channels, nadis. Others stimulated chakras or cooled the nervous system. Some unlocked emotional storage held deep in the hips, heart, or spine. To lie in Savasana corpse pose wasn't laziness. It was a symbolic rehearsal for ego death. To sit in Padmasana lotus wasn't a flex. But it mirrored the unfolding of consciousness itself. And in Kundalini yoga, movement became almost ritualistic. Spinal rolls, breath of fire, dynamic kriyas, all designed to activate dormant energy, awaken Shakti and lift it through the spine like a serpent climbing the tree of life. The body wasn't just a vessel, it was a ladder, and every posture was a rung. In ancient Egypt, movement was embedded into temple rites. Though much has been lost, Scattered scrolls and carvings hint that priestesses and initiates practiced what some researchers call sacred posturing, intentional bodily positions meant to channel solar or lunar energies. Certain temple corridors were walked a specific way. Ceremonial dances mimicked the flow of the Nile, the rising sun, the spiral of the stars. In other words, your posture told the cosmos you were ready to receive. Modern anthropology calls it ritual movement, but the ancients may have simply called it alignment. The Greeks too believed the body should be sculpted not just in form but in ethos. To walk upright, balanced and poised, was a sign of inner harmony. Plato saw gymnasium training not as vanity, but as soul conditioning, because how one held their body influenced how they held their mind. The Stoics believed the way you carried yourself in difficulty revealed the level of your virtue. To slump, collapse, shrink, that was giving energy to despair. To stand firm, breathe deep, remain still, that was spiritual strength made visible. They understood, before psychology caught up, that posture affects thought, not just in the moment, but in the whole arc of who you're becoming. Among indigenous cultures of the Americas, movement was a spiritual dialogue. The Lakota sun dance, the Mayan trance rituals, the Hopi Kachina ceremonies, none of it was random. Each gesture told a story. Each step circled the earth, mirrored the stars, invoked the ancestors. To dance in rhythm was to merge with the earth's vibration. To move in ceremony was to lift your frequency through reverence, sometimes for hours, sometimes in silence, until exhaustion gave way to vision. Even in early Christianity and desert mysticism, bodily posture carried deep spiritual weight. To prostrate oneself wasn't humiliation. It was the ego melting, the illusion of separateness dissolving in the dirt. Monks knelt for hours in prayer not out of guilt, but to become hollow channels. The bowed head, the open palms, the still body before the divine. These weren't gestures, they were vibrational doorways. The outer form shifted the inner state, and the inner state shaped the soul's frequency. Today, we see posture as medical, something to correct. But to the ancients, posture was spiritual geometry. Your spine was a staff of light, your breath, a sacred wind, your movement, a ritual offering to the unseen. And they understood this truth. If you carry yourself like energy is flowing, then energy will. You want to raise your vibration permanently? Start with your body, not by judging it, but by honoring it as a living temple. Let your posture remember what your mind has forgotten. You were designed for divine flow. To enter the sacred, the ancients often had to leave something behind. Not money, not possessions, but the ordinary mind, the thinking, judging, calculating voice that says, I'm me, and that is the world. And so, across cultures they found a way to dissolve it. They called it trance, ecstasy, rapture, sometimes madness, but always a state beyond self. Because when you stop identifying as the voice in your head, the rest of the universe starts whispering back. Let's begin in West Africa. In the Yoruba tradition, trance wasn't rare. It was essential. During sacred drumming rituals, practitioners of Ifa or Orisha devotion would dance for hours, hips moving like rivers, feet stomping the earth like thunder, all in synchrony with the beat. Then the shift would come. Eyes glaze over. Breath deepens. A presence descends. They called it mounting. The deity doesn't appear. It rides the body. The person is still there, and yet they're not. What replaced them was divine intelligence, ancient energy, a vibration too high for the mind to control, but not too high for the body to embody. These weren't performances. They were encounters. Ritual was the gateway. Trance was the vessel. And transformation was the goal. Now to the Amazon, where ayahuasca wasn't a psychedelic adventure. It was a portal. Shamans called ayahuasqueros would chant Icaros, sacred vibrational songs throughout the night, guiding initiates through a jungle of inner visions. These weren't hallucinations. They were vibrations made visible. To drink the brew wasn't to get high. It was to descend into the soul, purge stored trauma, face ancestral spirits and recalibrate one's entire energetic field. The vomiting? They called it la purga, You weren't sick. You were shedding low vibration physically, emotionally, spiritually. The mind would resist. But the song, the space, the plant, the trance all pushed it aside. And in that vacancy came the voice of the forest, or the serpent, or the mother, or silence. And silence was the loudest of all. In the Greek world, the Eleusinian mysteries offered something similar, though no one could speak of it. For nearly 2,000 years, initiates from all over the Mediterranean made a pilgrimage to Eleusis, where they drank a sacred brew, possibly kykeon, a barley and mint mixture, and underwent unspeakable transformation. They emerged, changed, not because they learned something, but because they experienced the divine directly, a vibration beyond thought. Even Plato hinted at it. He said those who experienced the mysteries no longer feared death, because something in them had already died, the part that clings to illusion, separateness and self. Let's not forget Sufism. In the Islamic mystical tradition, whirling was not symbolic. It was surgical. Dervishes would spin, arms extended, one palm facing heaven, the other earth, and turn for hours, entering a trance so deep the ego simply let go. They called it sama, listening, not with the ears, with the soul. They whirled to remember that the world itself spins. That stillness is found in motion. That to lose control is sometimes the only way to receive the greater control. This wasn't performance art. It was celestial alignment. The dervish became the axis. The heart became the drum. And the trance became the teacher. In the Christian world, saints and mystics, Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, Hildegard of Bingen, often described their divine encounters with a striking similarity. They lost track of space and time. They wept. They collapsed. They saw light. And they heard the voice of God, not with ears, but with being. These moments weren't polite. They were overwhelming. Ecstasy literally means to stand outside oneself. And they did. Not once, but regularly. Through fasting. Through prayer. Through solitude. They didn't seek trance to escape the world. They sought it to transcend it, and return with wisdom no book could teach. Even in indigenous Siberia, Mongolian steppe, and Arctic tribal lineages, shamans would drum themselves into alternate states. The drum wasn't a rhythm. It was a ladder. Each beat sent the shaman higher or deeper, depending on the need. To retrieve lost souls. To heal sickness. To restore spiritual harmony. The trance was not the goal. It was the vehicle, the bridge between seen and unseen. And the stronger the trance, the clearer the message. But here's the most fascinating part. But across all these cultures, no matter the continent, language or theology, the trance state was the same. Eyes flickering, breath slowed, body still or rhythmic, and the vibration elevated. Because the ordinary mind can't raise vibration. It holds on to the past. It calculates, it fears. But the trance state? It empties the vessel. And that's the real secret. When the mind gets quiet enough, the soul begins to sing. And when the soul sings, the body vibrates. When the body vibrates, the world responds. And you don't return as the same person. You return as a tuned instrument. Capable of hearing more, feeling more, becoming more. Because something deep within you remembered. You are not the thought. You are the sound beneath it. Let's bring it home. Not to a temple or a cave, but to this moment. To you, sitting quietly with a phone or laptop, surrounded not by chanting mystics, but by apps, notifications and fluorescent light. Here's the thing most people don't realize. You are still vibrating. Every moment. Every second. Every cell in your body, humming. The difference is, you forgot how to listen. Not just to sound, but to feeling, to energy, to emotion. Because emotion is energy in motion, and energy is vibration, which means your sadness, vibration, your joy, vibration, vibration. Even your boredom is a frequency trying to tell you something. We've just been taught to override it, to analyze it, to suppress it, but never to actually feel it. The ancient mystics would have found that odd. In modern science, we use phrases like brainwaves, beta, alpha, theta, delta. Each one corresponds to a mental state: alertness, daydream, deep sleep, intuition. But what are brainwaves, really? Electrical signals, frequencies. Your brain isn't thinking, it's pulsing, just like a radio tower, or a singing bowl, or a drum. And these waves shift based on your emotional state, which means your inner world is measurable vibration. And this brings us to a very quiet, very urgent modern truth. Most people are emotionally vibrating at the level of survival, stress, scarcity, control, hypervigilance. The mystics called this the lower nature, not because it was evil, but because it was dense, heavy, rooted in the body's need to protect itself. And they knew something our modern world keeps forgetting. If you stay in survival too long, your vibration gets stuck. Not permanently, but persistently. Now pause for a moment and look around. Have you noticed how many people live with clenched jaws, shallow breath, tight chests, always thinking, always scrolling, always planning or regretting? That isn't awareness. It's dissonance. A nervous system constantly hijacked by noise, by fear, by addiction to stimulation. In ancient times, the first sign that someone was spiritually misaligned was their breath. Too fast, too short, too shallow. Why? Because the breath was the rhythm of the soul, and when the breath broke, so did the connection. Not to God, but to stillness, to clarity, to the subtle vibration beneath thought, what mystics from Sufi poets to Taoist monks called the essence. We live in a culture that calls intuition woo, but sells caffeine to replace it. We question whether vibration is real, but carry nervous systems vibrating with anxiety. We scoff at the idea of raising frequency, but fill our homes with Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, radio signals, all of them invisible vibrations, constantly surrounding and passing through us. You can't see them, but your body knows they're there. Your cells respond, your brain adjusts, your heart rate shifts, and still we ask, is vibration real? It's the only thing that ever was. But here's the beautiful part. If your frequency can be lowered, it can also be raised, not by hacking your nervous system, not by buying a new manifestation planner, but by returning to alignment. And alignment means your emotions are not being denied, they're being honored. Your thoughts are not controlling you, they're being observed. Your breath is not rushed, it's deep, slow, present. Your habits are not reactive, they're sacred, intentional. Your surroundings are not chaotic, they're curated with love. And no, you don't need to live in the Himalayas, because the new temple is your attention. The new altar is your routine. The new vibration is how you carry yourself through the noise. The mystics knew that vibration could not be taught. It could only be felt, and refelt again, until it became the new normal. So how do we do that today? Not through perfection, not through pretending to be spiritual, but through emotional honesty, energetic responsibility, and small daily choices that say, I choose to vibrate above fear. I choose to breathe with the rhythm of life. I choose to become the kind of presence my soul longs for. And every time you do that, you are not just raising your vibration. You are becoming the tuning fork for everyone around you. You can say all the right things. You can smile in public. You can smile in public. You can post your gratitude. You can even pray out loud, meditate at sunrise, and repeat mantras 108 times. But if your energy doesn't match the words, it shows. Because energy doesn't lie, and it never has. You might lie to yourself. You might lie to others. But the space around you, the subtle field of vibration, is always telling the truth. This is why the mystics weren't interested in what you said. They were interested in what you carried. They would listen to your silence. They would feel your aura. They would watch how animals responded to you, how your footsteps sounded on stone floors, how your presence changed a room. Because long before we had MRI machines or polygraph tests, they already knew. The body keeps the frequency. The spirit broadcasts it. And the soul never forgets its tuning. Modern science is just beginning to catch up. We now speak of heart coherence, of brain-heart synchronization, of electromagnetic fields measurable several feet from the body. The HeartMath Institute has found that your heart sends signals to your brain, not the other way around. And those signals change based on one thing: your emotional state. Fear creates one pattern. Gratitude creates another. It's not metaphorical. It's literal. Gratitude reorganizes your electrical field, which means your inner vibration writes the electromagnetic song you walk through life humming, and no amount of faking it can overwrite that code. You can't pretend your way into a higher vibration, because your cells already know. But this brings up a painful truth. Most people's vibration is shaped by emotional dishonesty. We suppress, we distract, we cope. We say, "I'm fine," when we're empty. We say, "I'm blessed," when we're afraid. We say, "I'm happy," when we're screaming inside. Not because we're liars, but because we were never taught emotional literacy. We were taught emotion is weakness, expression is drama, vulnerability is dangerous. So we replaced honesty with performance. And the cost? Energetic distortion. You become out of tune with yourself. And that out of tune signal starts attracting more dissonance. Suddenly, your relationships feel forced. Your work feels off. Your body starts aching. Your mind feels foggy. Nothing flows. It's not a curse. It's feedback. The field around you is whispering. You're pretending too much. You're out of alignment. You're not being true. Now, in ancient traditions, this misalignment wasn't seen as failure. It was seen as a call. In Vedic thought, this is what they meant by karma. Not punishment, but energetic consequence. A vibrational echo of what hasn't yet been faced. In Sufism, they spoke of the nafs, the ego's false identity, the masks we wear, the vibrations we perform. And in Taoism, the misalignment from the Tao was not sin, it was disharmony, a straying from the natural current of life. All of them pointed to the same truth. If you're not honest about your energy, you're not free. But honesty doesn't mean spiraling in pain. It means becoming aware of your current note, without judgment. Imagine your vibration like a musical instrument. Some days you're in tune. Some days you're off. The goal isn't to force yourself to sound perfect. It's to gently retune. One thought, one breath, one choice at a time. You don't need to wait for a perfect mood to raise your vibration. You start by stopping the performance. By saying, "This is what I really feel. This is what I've been avoiding. This is what my soul is trying to say." And as soon as you do, the distortion lifts. The static clears. You don't have to pretend you're light. You just have to remove the layers that keep you from realizing you already are. That's why mystics across the world, from Native American shamans to Zen monks, emphasized presence over performance. Because in presence the lie falls away. You feel your pain, and it vibrates itself into peace. You see your fear, and it alchemizes into clarity. You sit with your discomfort, and it melts into silence. And suddenly, you don't need to raise your vibration. You just stop lowering it. You don't need to seek enlightenment. You just stop dimming the light. That's the secret. Energy doesn't lie. And when you stop lying to yourself, your vibration begins to rise, not by force, but by truth. In a quiet clinic in Germany, researchers place sensors on the human body and study something ancient through machines barely decades old. They watch what happens to the body when it enters deep states of rest, prayer, or meditation. What they find isn't mystical, it's measurable. Brain waves slow, heart rate synchronizes, the vagus nerve activates, cellular repair begins. But here's the curious part. In these states, the body begins to emit a different frequency, a coherent frequency, one that resembles a tuning fork returning to pitch. What ancient mystics called soul harmony, inner radiance, or divine light, is now showing up on heart rate monitors and frequency graphs. It turns out healing was never just a physical process. It was always a vibrational return. This is what the ancients meant by raising your vibration. Not just feeling good, but remembering the original rhythm you were created in. When they chanted in caves, when they anointed with oil, when they sat in silence under olive trees or fig branches, they weren't doing something spiritual. They were tuning the body into coherence, realigning breath, intention, and attention into one state of being. What we call healing today, they called remembrance. A remembering of a state before distortion, before guilt, before fear, before you forgot you were allowed to feel whole. Modern healing often focuses on removal. Get rid of the symptom. Get rid of the weight. Get rid of the addiction. Get rid of the trauma. But ancient healing focused on restoration. Not what's wrong with you, but what's been forgotten in you. They asked, what sacred rhythm did your body once remember? What frequency did your soul once sing? What silence did you once trust until noise replaced it? They didn't fight the darkness. They sat with it long enough for it to retune itself. That's the new frequency of healing we're beginning to rediscover. Today you'll hear it called many things. Somatic integration, energy psychology, trauma-informed therapy, heart-brain coherence. But under all the labels, it's the same principle returning. When you calm the body, the soul speaks. When you still the mind, the vibration resets. When you stop resisting what is begins to change. In this silence, the field begins to rearrange. Your emotions were never the enemy. They were the messengers, the vibrational feedback loops, the instruments out of tune because you never had a teacher, or a safe room to cry in, or a soft witness to your becoming. But here's the truth. Your system was never broken. It was always trying to find coherence again. Through the panic attacks, through the withdrawal, through the burnout, the scrolling, the staying up too late. Even your patterns were prayers. Misguided, maybe, but desperate to return to a vibration that felt like home. And now, we're starting to remember. Breathwork isn't a trend, it's a reboot. Mantras aren't magic, they're frequency alignments. Stillness isn't laziness, it's energetic restoration. We're no longer healing to get back to some idealized version of ourselves. We're healing to remember the self before it got distorted by survival. We're learning to sit with emotion instead of escaping it, to feel pain and not collapse, to speak truth and still be safe. We're remembering how to vibrate in wholeness, not perfection, and to stop seeking salvation in performance. This is the vibration ancient mystics wrote about in hidden scrolls and desert songs, a frequency not earned but uncovered. You don't raise your vibration to be worthy of healing. You allow healing to happen, and the vibration rises on its own. And this is the greatest shift. You don't fix the energy. You become the space where the energy can fix itself. This is the return. This is the new frequency. Not new because it's modern, but new because it's finally being remembered. There's a reason certain sounds give you chills. Why one chant makes you feel lifted, and another feels like it's pulling something ancient from your bones. Not every sound is just sound. Some are codes. Some were feared, and some were deliberately erased from history, not because they were useless, but because they worked too well. Let's start in Europe. During the medieval period, the Catholic Church systematically banned certain musical intervals, particularly one called the tritone. To most ears, the tritone sounds eerie, unstable, almost dissonant. To the Church, it was dangerous. They called it diabolus in musica, the devil in music. Why? Because it created an energy that felt forbidden, like it unlocked something primal, something that couldn't be controlled by doctrine or dogma. So they stripped it from sacred music. They outlawed certain chant forms. They narrowed musical expression to only acceptable frequencies, the ones that kept emotion safe, vibration tamed, and spirit in a box. But it wasn't just about sound. It was about spiritual memory. The Gnostics, who believed the soul could remember its divine origin through vibration, were wiped out. The Cathars, who used tonal harmonics in healing rituals, were burned as heretics. The ancient modes of healing chants vanished from cathedrals and were replaced with rigid, sanitized versions. It was the vibrational equivalent of spiritual censorship. Meanwhile, halfway across the world in Tibet, monks were perfecting overtone chanting, a form of throat singing where one voice splits into two or more harmonic frequencies. These chants weren't art, they were tools. Each overtone resonated with a specific energy center in the body. The monks could direct vibration to organs, emotions, even subtle realms of consciousness. And yet, these practices remained hidden. preserved only in remote monasteries, often targeted or desecrated during invasions, colonization or political suppression. Why? Again, too powerful. You can't control a population that remembers how to vibrate with the cosmos. In Australia, the didgeridoo wasn't just a musical instrument. It was a dreamtime vessel, a vibrational bridge between this world and the ancestral dimension. When played in ritual, it created frequencies that synced with earth rhythms, altered brainwave states and opened gateways. But Western colonizers dismissed it as primitive, just as they did with African drums, Native American flutes, Mongolian throat singing, and Sufi zikr chants. They called them superstitious, unscientific, uncivilized, but they weren't. They were frequency maps, handed down through oral lineages too sacred to be written, and erasing them wasn't an accident. It was strategy. The same happened with the solfeggio frequencies. Ancient Gregorian chants used specific tonal patterns said to heal DNA, open the heart, elevate consciousness. Each tone had a sacred vibration. Narrate fear and guilt, liberates fear and guilt. 528 Hz. Restores and heals DNA. 6 harmonizes relationship. 741 Hz. Awakens intuition. 85 Hz. Returns the soul to spiritual order. Then, mysteriously, these tones disappeared from Western music theory. For centuries, no one noticed, until a few 20th century researchers began digging through ancient hymnals and biblical math. What they found: the original solfeggio frequencies had been scrubbed out, replaced with a modern tuning system that flattened emotional depth and spiritual resonance. The ancient tones weren't just musical preferences, they were vibrational medicine, and someone had put them in a locked drawer. Across cultures, again and again, the same pattern. Wherever a sound could elevate consciousness, it was either demonized, mocked, or erased. And so, humanity forgot. We forgot that we are tuning forks, that certain chants realign our cellular memory, that some vibrations don't just move the air, they move the soul. Now here's the twist. These bans and erasures, they didn't destroy the frequencies. They just buried them. And you cannot bury vibration forever. It ripples underground. It echoes in dreams. It returns in the silence between modern songs. Which brings us to the next part. They're coming back. Not through monasteries or scrolls, but through headphones, sound baths, midnight playlists, binaural beats on YouTube with millions of plays. The frequencies that were silenced are singing again. And what's more, we're finally starting to remember why we need them. It always starts quietly. A Tibetan bowl in a yoga class. A binaural track on a sleep app. A strange sense of calm during a chant you don't understand. At first it seems like background noise, but then something inside you shifts. Not dramatically, not instantly, but like a key turning in a lock you forgot was there. That's the return of resonance. Not hype, not trend, not spiritual consumerism, but the soul responding to something ancient, something it once sang with before forgetting it knew how to sing at all. Across the world, these frequencies, once lost, banned or buried, are resurfacing. But they're not coming back through religion. They're returning through sound therapy, trauma healing, digital meditation, and even neuroscience. Today, scientists can map brainwave shifts when you listen to 432 Hz, said to synchronize the brain and heart, 528 Hz, associated with cell repair and emotional release, 7.83 Hz, the Schumann resonance, Earth's natural frequency, known to calm anxiety and restore balance. And for once, the mystics and the scientists are saying the same thing. This isn't just sound. It's a state of being. Go into any modern healing space from Bali to Berlin, and you'll hear it. Gongs, crystal bowls, shamanic drums, harmonic overtone chanting, even white noise machines tuned to ancient scales. It's not just aesthetic. It's energetic hygiene. People are no longer just healing emotions. They're recalibrating frequency. You'll hear phrases like, tune your nervous system, clear the static from your field, repattern your vibration. Most don't realize how ancient these ideas are. They come from Egypt. It will be from the Vedas. from oral rituals never written down. And now they live in apps, playlists, and 21st century rituals that look suspiciously like ancient rites just rebranded. But here's the most powerful part. It's working. People are healing without words. Trauma is releasing not through talk, but through tone. Children are falling asleep to the same frequencies once played in temples of Isis and Asclepius. We're learning slowly that vibration isn't entertainment. It's medicine. And unlike pharmaceuticals, it has no side effects, except peace. This isn't about rejecting modern tools. It's about remembering the first tool we were ever given. Sound. Before language. Before scrolls. Before doctrine. There was tone, and the soul still knows what to do with it. You might not know why a certain chant makes you cry, or why your whole body softens when a specific frequency plays, but something in you does. It's the part of you that remembers when sound was sacred. Not just something to hear, but something to become. That's what the mystics meant when they said, "In the beginning was the word." Not a word you read, a word you felt, a tone so complete it didn't need explanation, because it carried the essence of everything. And now, after centuries of forgetting, we're becoming instruments again. Every breath is a vibration. Every word is a spell. Every silence is a space where sound might return. You don't need to chant in Sanskrit to feel this. You don't need a sound bath or a $300 singing bowl. You just need to listen differently. To ask, what am I letting into my field? What tones am I normalizing? What frequencies am I surrounded by? Because make no mistake, you are always being tuned. By your environment. By your choices. By what you allow to echo in your mind. The mystics didn't chant for aesthetics. They chanted to hold a vibration long enough for reality to change. They knew a single frequency sustained with belief could dissolve illness, attract synchronicity, or awaken memory. Not because of magic, but because reality itself responds to coherence, and coherence is sound made whole. So the question is, no longer, how do I raise my vibration? But rather, what am I currently resonating with? And does it match the life I want to live? Because your vibration isn't a mood, it's a mirror. And every time you come back to silence, or a sacred tone, or a breath that slows the world down, you retune the instrument. And that, dear listener, is what makes you powerful again. They say, you cannot step into the same river twice. But what if the river was not outside of you? What if the current, the rhythm, the vibration was something you were never meant to chase, but something you were always meant to return to? For thousands of years, mystics across deserts and mountains, temples and forests, all whispered some version of the same truth. You are not just flesh. You are not just thought. You are not even just spirit. You are a vibration, remembering itself through experience. The Taoists called it the way. The Vedic sages called it Nada Brahma. The world is sound. The Kabbalists called it the song of the Sephirot. The mystics of the Ethiopian desert called it Zima, not music, but a vibration that feeds the soul of the soul. And long before science mapped waveforms, the ancients were already tuning themselves back to a frequency they called divine. But this teaching was never about manifesting money, or attracting love, or getting the body you want. Though, curiously, all those things often came. Because when the soul returns to harmony, the world rearranges itself around your coherence, not as reward, but as reflection. You see, the universe doesn't respond to need. It responds to frequency. And the highest frequency isn't happiness. It isn't even joy. It's presence. Stillness. A silent yes to this moment, whatever it contains. That's what they were training for in those temples. Not bliss, not escape, but the ability to stand still at the center of the storm and remain unchanged. That's vibration, and that's why it had to be hidden. When colonizers entered Africa, they didn't just steal gold, they banned the drums. Why? Because the drum carried a rhythm older than language. A pulse that connected earth to spirit, body to soul, people to each other. They feared it, not because it was primitive, but because it was too powerful. It could awaken memory, reignite lineage, restore sovereignty to people who were never meant to forget who they were. So it had to be silenced. The same happened in Europe, in India, in Tibet, in the Andes, wherever the body and spirit danced too closely together. Someone came to shut the music down, but it's returning now. Not in noise, not in shouting, not even in revolution, but in something quieter. You, breathing differently, thinking differently, trusting the body's wisdom again. You lighting candles, not for ritual, but for remembrance. You sitting in silence not to escape the world, but to hear the song that never stopped playing beneath it. This isn't a self-help technique. It's a lineage, a remembering, a re-entry into the current that never left you, but that you stopped believing you had access to. Now you do, not because you earned it, but because you paused long enough to hear it again. So here, at the end of this journey, is what remains. You don't need to raise your vibration. You need to stop lowering it by fighting yourself. You don't need to become spiritual. You need to stop numbing the frequency you already are. You don't need to force healing. You need to sit still long enough to become the instrument again. You don't even need to find the light. You need to tune in, and remember, you always were. When the mystics said, "Become like the sun," they didn't mean become loud or bold or blinding. They meant, radiate without needing permission. Warm everything around you, just by being. Rise, fall, rest, return, without apology. That is vibration. That is power. And that is what has always lived inside you. This is not a trend, not a hack, not a quantum shortcut. This is the return to your original frequency. And it was never truly lost, just waiting for someone quiet enough to hear it again.